For a victim of abuse, leaving the relationship doesn't just mean losing the person. It means losing the role, the narrative, and the purpose that comes within the dynamics. A major loss, all things considered, since these things were the backbone of what was relied upon for all those traumatic years. And so for a survivor of abuse, attention to such trauma is needed. They enter a grieving process, a drowning process. Many after safety sink or don't know how to handle a whole new life. They feel overwhelmed, crazy, and an urgent sense of displacement. Steps need to be taken to get through this as a victim, as they enter an isolated battle of complex psychological nature. It's a battle against herself to transition from the woman she was to the one she is to become. We move now to the drowning process, where this grief experienced by survivors feels extremely uncomfortable. The silence is deafening. There is no need to be on constant alert anymore. And so the victim has to learn to deal with that dramatic shift in their lives. The grief feels destabilizing and disappropriate at times, as emotions flare out over someone who caused such tragedy. In simple terms, the grieving process is the nervous system catching up to all the unfelt emotions and trauma that was left in the past. Because during abuse, feeling the full emotional effects of such impacts would have simply been too much. And so the psyche prioritizes survival over emotional feeling. If the grief would be experienced during survival, the brain knows it would lead to collapse. So the emotions are pushed away, often leaving victims numb to their emotions and unable to access them. That way, when it's quiet again on the outside, the space opens up internally for the floodgates of emotion to pour out. And so they do, all at once. The loss is undeniable. The fantasy collapsed. The victim is grieving everything, all at once. Let's start off with the abuser themselves, because the victim is left to grieve them in many different ways. The first aspect is grief of the one that they used to be. The simple and tragic fact is that the abuser wasn't always bad. The one she chose to marry wasn't the monster that forced divorce. He held traits that were loving and built her to attraction and relationship in the first place. And so reflection on the man he once was brings such pain in the way she misses that person that is now lost. While at the same time, when wondering where that person went, victims often blame themselves for causing such change and rage to consume him. The blame is deception. It couldn't be further from the truth. The victim's grief returns to the hopeful side of perspective. They look back often with rose-tinted glasses, a stance they often held during the abuse as well. During the relief phases of the cycle, the good side of the abuser often returns in flashes, a true tragedy, a false sense of hope. During this time, the hope is another coping mechanism, fueling their persistence in the relationship. And so when the plug is pulled, it's not just the man that is sucked down, but that hope is also burst with him, all while the victim stands with blood on her hands, knowing she was the one who ended it. The hardest thing is to let go, to give up what took everything to survive him, to kill all the hope, the desperation that he would change. It's like he's being drowned, and hence a piece of you dies too. This is the perception for survivors of abuse, and the constant mental battle in their heads. It's a struggle few will understand, and so it becomes one often felt in isolation, as those around her struggle to understand why she misses someone who hurt her so deeply. Adding to that, it's not just him she has to grieve. It's the relationship dynamic and meaning it poured into her life. After all, abusive relationships are extremely intense. The thrills of the roller coaster result in emotional saturation, while the role she played became so ingrained and integral that it became her identity. And so the intensity and passion of that must also be grieved. In many cases also, when abuse survivors jump into a follow-up relationship, they perceive the healthiness as quiet, which the traumatized system reads as absence. There is a large amount of passion felt in reminiscing the relationship. The passion is backed up by illusion. Illusion that abusive relationships create of exclusivity, a closed world only experienced by the two partners. They are the only ones let into this fantasy they have created, and so only they understand it, creating a passionate feeling of alignment. This feeling of feeling irreplaceable enhanced the passion due to the extreme circumstances. For the survivor, this perceived purpose gave pain status, and so the fallout often produces feelings of worthlessness, knowing everything that she was is now gone. And so, in the absence of purpose, doubt creeps in. She's not in denial of the situation, it's attachment mourning, another coping mechanism to deflect the confronting nature of the situation. Attempts from the brain once again to contain the reality of what happened into something digestible. Because the truth is, it was that bad. And so the fantasy is collapsed. All the sacrifice is revealed as in vain. And now the victim must grieve all the wasted love and effort towards someone who responded with only pain and damage. A lot. Too much. So the brain tries to preserve coherence, to protect itself from the overwhelming shame, grief, and identity rupture. And so the victim feels a pull towards him again, a fight within her own mind. Though she has left him, the soul tie remains, fueled by her own instinct, helped also by her lack of clarity when reminiscing the traumatic memories. When abuse breaks a soul down layer by layer, it doesn't just violate the trust between her soul towards loved ones and others around her, it also destroys the trust for herself through internal conflicts, making her second guess who was the villain in their story. Part of that conflict comes from distorted memory loss and tragic instability on how she values the boundaries being violated. With abuse being inconsistent and invisible from the outside perspectives in most instances, the victims stand alone in this battle of grief due to no perceived outlets of people who could understand this life held behind closed doors. This leaves them to their own thoughts, to regulate and judge what happened. And when this is up to devices that are hypnotized by the seductive scent of familiarity, they often look back at the abuse as being normal, while at the same time, more coping mechanisms from the brain often fog memories entirely to try to withhold the full truth. That's why urges to go back can be so strong, as the instability of a new life produce cravings of what is familiar. All the doubt produced by the brain is a masked attempt to cover up the severity of the truth. The question, was it really that bad, when stripped down to its core, is revealed as, can I survive the truth if I admit it was? As with the truth comes confrontation, that all the walls that were her life's work have now come crashing down. As survivors are hit with oncoming waves of grief, another follows. As victims find themselves grieving the abuse itself, not because they wanted it, but because it organized their way of life within the cycle. It gave structure, purpose, urgency, and a role within it all, a clear path with clear goals, certainty. When this is all lost, the victim faces a frightening emptiness of vast, unstructured space. She has freedom without regulation, identity without instruction, and so she doesn't know how to handle what is so new to her. The grief of the role she had poses questions of who she is without it. The purposes she had, all sucked in a vacuum. And so she asks herself what remains. The role provided the sense of being essential. It provided identity through suffering, and the meaning that made the pain survivable. And so questions arise, statements follow, and when shared as desperate hope for support, miseducated judgment often returns. Supporting a survivor can also be hard, especially when you care so deeply. But steps back need to be taken to see what they are actually grieving. Missing the role doesn't mean they wanted or liked the abuse. The real loss is the identity and lifestyle structure that became their nature over the course of the relationship. And so to heal from this takes big steps of rewiring what has been so deeply drilled in. It requires acceptance and finding peace in recognizing what happened. It means separating what was real from what was adaptive, honoring the strength without glorifying the suffering, and building and restoring purpose to the person that you were, rather than the bond as your identity. Victims don't necessarily grieve the deception of abuse. They grieve because they invested their entire soul into surviving something that never deserved them. And so the grief is the reclaiming of the truth. When mourning the fantasy that was up during the abusive relationship, the self that lived within it is gone too. So the victim not only has to live in what feels like a new world, they need to fully rediscover what makes them them without it. And the first introduction to this new world that she now has to live in is waves of grief of the one that has passed. Attempts to drown her while she is still learning to swim, all while several painful realizations are made. The soothing words and promises held so closely to her heart turned out to be false. The belief that her endurance would reap reward shattered. And perhaps the most tragic, the painful realization that the person she was before the abuse, her innocence, her trust, has all been damaged so severely, and her identity has paid the price. Rebuilding can be the hardest phase, but I want you to know that it will all be worth it. I want you to know how strong you are to overcome what you had. You are not lost. This is a delicate phase, a natural phase of recovery to rebuild what's been torn apart. A wounded animal has to be nurtured back to health. So give yourself time, give yourself space, give yourself love. To learn to be yourself again, you must first unlearn who you had to be. Release the grip on what's been held on for so long. Learn to trust yourself again. You don't need to survive anymore. Let go. Let go of all the processes, your hyper responsibility for others and their emotions, your identity built on suffering endurance, your belief that safety comes from managing people and constantly watching for sudden movements, your reflex to justify or over-explain your boundaries. Let them all go. You don't need them anymore. Drop your guard. You are safe. It's all going to be okay. You don't have to look over your shoulder. You don't have to second guess every detail, every action. The coast is clear. You are free. It's a process. Take your time. Turn back each layer with care, with love, because you deserve that. You can rest now.